Here's another video inspired by something I really enjoy talking about because I like challenging topics, taboo topics, not that silly stuff I used to talk about before my reboot. No. That was, all I did was say the same thing over and over 3 times a day to people who ultimately were incels and weren't ever going to change because they locked themselves in their own prison. Now I get to talk about stuff that's less popular. Less people will watch my videos, less people will like my videos, and that is my comfort zone. This is what I enjoy. So the video, I'm going to reference it again: alcoholics, drug addicts, and permanent depression sufferers, shared background, unresolved trauma. Now this is just simply the newest in the series, where I am pointing out that when people have unresolved trauma in their youth, it leads often to predictable outcomes if they don't get it resolved. It doesn't guarantee it, but we can see shared similar backgrounds with people. And then this is the first video where I'm going to tie these together. So, in the most recent videos, I tied together alcoholics, drug addicts, and people who suffer from permanent depression. Okay, but if you've been following along, you know that I've said the exact same thing with specifically gay men, gay people in general, but gay men. When you hang out with them just for a little bit, you will learn their life story. You will find out about the trauma that they had. Typically, it's some kind of very negative relationship with one of their parents. And actually, someone who just saw Rocket Man about Elton John was telling me about this, how Elton John's own dad refused affection with him. He refused to give him praise or show him any kind of love or support. Same thing with his mother. Elton John, as we know, was gay, one of the most famous gay men. And there's a similar situation with Bohemian Rhapsody, from the lead singer of Queen. I did see that movie. And it was another thing. His dad was so caught up in his son, being an engineer or whatever, living a certain kind of lifestyle that his dad wanted him to have. And ultimately, he disconnected from that version of masculinity, ended up becoming bisexual. Even though he married a woman, he ultimately was very interested in men physically. So I'll give you one more example. I know it's from a movie, but have you ever seen The Breakup with Jennifer Aniston and Vince Vaughn? My wife and I recently watched that on DVD. Isn't that a weird sentence? We watched it on DVD, but we did. We cut Netflix, and now we're just watching, if we're watching anything, it's on DVD. Justin Long, you know who that is? He has kind of a smaller part in the movie The Breakup, but he plays this kind of transgender curious person in the movie. And it's very obvious that's his character. And there's nothing in question other than they want this character to be visibly confused about his gender. In the movie, something Justin Long's character says, he references Father's Day, and he says something to the effect of, some people, they were talking about upcoming holidays, because it was around like April or May. And he said, so he names off Memorial Day, Flag Day, all this stuff. And then he says, well, there's Father's Day. Some people choose to celebrate Father's Day. I don't. It's such a common known thing that especially when a man has a broken relationship with his father, it often leads to this disconnect with positive masculinity, and then that man sexualizes men. He sexualizes what he simply didn't get from his father in a positive way, or having some kind of positive role model, an older man in his life. With that being said, I see the same thing happen with people who, so if you're gay, if you are an alcoholic, if you are a drug addict, and if you suffer from regular depression, I don't mean a temporary little depression spell, I'm depressed for a couple of weeks. No, I mean like you have to survive on meds to function in life because you're depressed every day if you don't. And even if you get off your meds, it's only going to get worse if you eventually, you'll have to get back on them and it's even worse and all this stuff. What I'm saying is, people who fall in those categories have a very predictable background of unresolved trauma. Just because you have unresolved trauma doesn't mean you're necessarily going to end up in one of those situations. But when you look at the people in those categories, most of them do have that shared background. And here's what's funny. I've been saying this in videos. And here's what's funny. As people from those categories leave comments on the videos, here's what happens. It's so predictable. This is what happens. The people who identify as gay, alcoholic, drug addict, suffering from depression, here's what they do. They say, no, you're wrong. That's not true. And then they'll type in 2 or 3 paragraphs telling me about the unresolved trauma they have from their life. Exactly what I just described in the video. They'll say, no, that's not true. And then they'll tell me the story, which completely backs up what I'm saying. So what I'm seeing here is another pattern, another generalization, which I'm not afraid to make generalizations. There's no rule on YouTube. Oh, you got to do your research. Remember, I start laughing when people say I need to do my research. This is YouTube. There's no rules about research. I'm not claiming any authority. I'm some random guy on the internet. I can say whatever I want to. And as long as people watch it and comment it, it makes me relevant. It gives me power. So with that being said, that was very unnecessary. It gives me power. So with that being said, I'm seeing a pattern. It's so predictable. Unresolved trauma often leads to people in those categories that I mentioned. And the people who watch my videos and leave comments are very likely to openly, immediately deny my theory, only to completely prove my theory as they go on to share what unresolved trauma they have. It's this really interesting thing that it's that predictable. It's a generalization. It's not always true. I recognize that. I'm not worried about that. What I find interesting are generalizations, because ultimately what I'm getting at is this. Some people experience trauma and yet they do get help. They do go to a counselor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and they work that stuff out and they get through it and they overcome it. Some don't even go to a professional, but they still find ways internally to sort it out and they overcome it. And they're not held back by that. But so many people are. I'm personally fascinated by this fact that so many people don't get the help that they need and resolve that stuff that happened to them in their youth. And instead, they find this new identity and they become labeled. Okay, well, I'm gay now. I didn't realize I was, but now I'm finding men attractive. This whiskey sure is great. I think I'll drink a bottle a night. Oh, what's this? Or whatever it is. Oh, well, I'm just depressed, so I need to survive off medicine my whole life now because that's who I am now. Society teaches that that's your identity, that's who you are. Society does not teach you, but what about the actual wound that you have? See, you could call me jaded, that's okay. But ultimately, my motivation is I want to see people actually get help, find healing for that wound, instead of carrying around these wounds inflicted by other people from their youth, and that bitterness and anger and lack of forgiveness. And so they move on with their life still carrying that. It's still weighing them down. It's not being addressed because culture teaches them this is just who you are now. You're an alcoholic, you're a drug addict, etc. Society isn't concerned with helping you heal that wound. This random guy on the internet who has no authority and doesn't do his research actually is speaking a lot of common sense that's not being said because it's taboo. I'm not afraid of that. There are no rules on YouTube against some random guy saying stuff like this. Even if it's not what I'm supposed to say or what you're not supposed to hear, I can't help but be distracted by what's so obvious. People aren't resolving their issues from their youth. Some people get over it, but some people don't. Some people's whole identity and future is shaped around a lack of healing. And then basically culture teaches guys like me, we're just crazy. So if we say something like this, well, you're not a professional. You haven't done your research. You don't suffer from these things. You don't know what it's like. You didn't suffer unresolved trauma. So therefore, who are you to say anything? Exactly. I couldn't be more clear that I'm not a professional. But I am one of the few people on the planet actually having this conversation. And that is actually what I care about. If I'm the only one having this kind of conversation, then I can be happy about that, because I feel that perhaps maybe that's the best way to show that I actually care. Your comments belong right here.